Aloud.
Welcome back to Aloud. I am your host, Joyce. And I'm here with you today with a client whom I met a long time ago in my coaching life, and I think in his life as a founder as well. This is a person who has inspired me repeatedly. As I told him, I remember when I became smitten with him as a leader and a person who really, I think, can challenge the way that we think about the journey of being a founder. This man is inventing something that your jaw may drop when I tell you about what he's up to, what he and his company are up to, as well as how quickly this company has grown and how much it stands to change literally not just the world, but the solar system as we know it. So this man, Tim Ellis, he and his team have collectively built the largest 3D printer on the planet and have proven themselves capable of printing rockets. So this is a machine that with very few parts can put together and rapidly iterate upon designs for things that can fly not just in our own stratosphere, but also can go into outer space. I'll let him tell you more about that. These things are humongous. They tower above the human body, and it's pretty inspiring to see. Now, why does any of that matter? I'll let him tell you about that. So you're in for a ride and a treat when we are going to get to know this very special human being whom I hope can help you discover how leading from your own zone of genius is the one and only path to you being the great one that you can be. Welcome to the show, Tim Ellis.
Yeah, awesome, Caneel. Thanks for having me. And happy to chat and share our story.
I'd love you to describe in your own words your mission and vision with this company.
I started, I guess, first a little more about me. So I started my career as a rocket propulsion development engineer. I was working at Jeff Bezos' space company, Blue Origin. So first joined when the whole propulsion team there was only about 20 people. At first as an intern, and then did a few back-to-back internships, and then was there full-time for a few years. So I would go from blank sheet of paper to first working version of a rocket engine and do all the different steps in between. Did the first metal 3D printing at Blue Origin, and then ultimately started the metal 3D printing division. So putting all of that together, then had the idea to found Relativity. So the goal of Relativity, and really the initial inspiration, was watching SpaceX land rockets and dock with the International Space Station. When I founded Relativity 5 years ago, SpaceX was 13 years old, and despite all of that success, they were still the only company in the world that wanted to make humanity multiplanetary and go to Mars and launch people there, and all their animations were really beautiful, but they faded to black right when the people walked out on Mars. And I thought, man, like, why, despite that really cool, inspiring success, has no one else been started to like help make this mission happen? And then I also saw with 3D printing, I really felt it was inevitable to build an industrial base on Mars and on another planet. And so at some point in humanity's future, a company had to be founded to actually build that technology. Otherwise, it just wasn't going to happen in our lifetime. And so I felt Relativity could be that company. And then the second inspiring part of it was, really looking at an aerospace factory for the last 60 years has not fundamentally changed. Like we're still building products one at a time by hand, with these giant factories full of fixed tooling and big complicated machines that are building products with hundreds of thousands to individual parts with a very complicated supply chain. So I really felt 3D printing was an automation technology that was a new tech stack for aerospace, much like electric vehicles and batteries and Tesla came along, and that was a new tech stack for cars and transportation versus gas internal combustion engines. And so we had the opportunity to actually build that. So that founded Relativity. We're 3D printing rockets. So we designed the rocket. We actually have 2 rockets now we're developing. Plus, we also build the 3D printers in the factory. We've raised about $700 million to date. And it's been like, yeah, as you said, a wild ride. And I'm happy to share more personal anecdotes along the way.
Let me just tell you first, as I hear this story and I put myself in the shoes of someone who's been outside of this, and you and I met shortly after you and your co-founder Jordan Noon graduated from Y Combinator. So this is in 2016. I believe at the time your team had 5 employees.
Yeah, I believe we had 5, but we were still like a very, very young company. I do remember when we met, looking back, and me and Jordan started working with you. It was, yeah, we were early.
You were really early. How old were you then?
I think I was 25, maybe 26. I founded Relativity at 25. Jordan was 22, I believe. And so, yeah, we were quite early in our career, but yeah, I've definitely found rate of learning is very important.
Yes. Yeah. I would say that's one of your superpowers as a leader. It's really what has enabled you to scale so quickly. One of the reasons I love working with startup founders is, and now it's be hard to call you a startup, but you're a venture-backed company and you were super small when we first met. But the way that particular game of business plays is it plays through you as an individual. And the big dare is, can you change as fast as your company will? Can you change as fast as your company needs you to? Because if you can't stay one step ahead of that change, you're going to feel the pain. And it's like boot camp for the soul.
Yeah, it is. And it is inevitable that there will come a time, even if you learn really, really fast. I've definitely found that there are times where your company is growing way faster than you are. And it is painful. It is hard. It is actually like one of the hardest things about running a startup when you are stretched and you're growing. And I even tell our team this. It's kind of like, yeah, when life is good is usually when you say like there's highs and there's lows, and like, but the lows you pick yourself back up again. Usually people say that when things are pretty good, but you forget that when there's lows, the whole point of them is you forget that there are highs and that things come back. And so I think, especially being a founder, you are putting your vision out there, and it feels really deeply personal. And when investors reject you or hires reject you, or, it feels like maybe the team isn't set up for success, like, yeah, you can definitely take it a lot on yourself. And like dealing with those emotions is probably one of the hardest parts of running a startup. Just the self-psychology of it all and the intensity of it all is a lot to contend with.
What's a time when you felt really challenged by your startup? What are some of those hard emotional times? If you can remember them.
Yeah, the question is almost, when did I not? Yeah, it is hard. So just more color. I mean, when we met, I think maybe we even started talking when we were just 2 people and we were hiring our first employees. So we started in Y Combinator. We then raised Series A straight out of YC. So we had about $10 million of funding. This was back in 2016, and then slowly started hiring. So we hired up to about 14 people. I had actually never managed people before. That was another big challenge. But yeah, it was 14 people for the first 2 years. And then for the last 3 years, we've gone from 14 to nearly 400. And so I think your earlier point is the most true that I've found, is that every time you're growing, and I've always heard this, every time your company doubles, everything changes. And that's very true as far as operations. But yeah, even with yourself, I think, figuring out how to actually hire people, and probably the people element, have been the most, the most intense. Like, I think finding customers, even the rejection of investors, like that stuff hurts and it's really intense and I think hard to get through. But yeah, I still have found the greatest personal challenge with just the people side of things, like how how do you inspire and lead a team and get them to work really effectively and deal with tons of different personalities and kind of integrate it all together.
What have you learned about yourself in the process?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in many ways I feel like I've learned to some extent you want to double down on what you're really really good at in your zone of genius.
Mm-hmm.
And then your job is actually to hire for people that have a zone of genius that fills in for your weakness. And that's actually not bad. It doesn't mean you can't improve in different areas. And I'm still working on it in many of the areas that are not my zone of genius. I actually think it is worthwhile to continue to learn and learn from the best in that. But I think the skill set of actually being able to bring on great people is one of the most important ones, because you learn a lot from external sources and kind of different perspectives, but almost nothing's better than working day in and day out with people that are truly accomplished in their career and then just learning from them.
Well, yeah, and learning from mistakes as well, I think it's one of the most common ways to learn.
Yeah,
So it's such a great thing to have great leaders around that you can kind of follow in their footsteps and get their advice and get them to weigh in on things. As I said, mistakes. Are there mistakes you remember ever making along the way?
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I would say there's definitely been some hiring mistakes here and there. I don't necessarily think that they were bad people. Like some of them have gone on to do great things. But yeah, it's just kind of catching earlier when, people that were a fit, at one point in time for the company are maybe less of a fit now, and they're just not having that much fun, really. And I think, there's kind of this dual opt-in, that I think about. Like you want people that are growing and learning and actually excited to be on the team. So I don't know if it's a mistake as much as learning, that if I were to do it all over again, and certainly how I am now, it's like much faster to pick up on pattern recognition of when people are struggling, like how to actually help address it directly. I think practicing a lot more directness and just realizing, I think one big turning point for feedback to me was realizing if you don't give feedback, you're actually hurting someone. Like you're doing them more of a disservice than giving them feedback that they don't want to hear, because you're still thinking it. But if you don't tell someone it directly, then you're actually withholding insight for them to be able to learn from. Because I certainly was much more conflict avoidant and early on. And I think whether that was direct, I never thought it was directly from age or inexperience. I still don't think it was, but I think it was just not having actually been in a situation of power before, like, where people were actually looking to me to lead something. In prior lives, even at Blue Origin and even all the way back to our rocket lab in college, it was usually, I had great ideas and I think people paid a lot of attention to that, but it was much different when, the buck completely stops with you and everyone actually reports to you.
Yeah, pretty confronting. Tell us about camping in a tent.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we went from 2 people to 14. That was the first 2 years. I think a lot of in hindsight, that was so slow. But I think the reason it was, it would be so much faster now. And I think, I was very focused on like operating efficiently, I guess. And that was way the wrong point to think about efficient operate. Like, don't make any mistakes. Like everything needs to be perfect and really well synced and goals like crisp and clear and everyone's in the same loop like all the time. Like it was very that. And I think the mistake there, and I'll get to the 10 story, but the mistake there was thinking that we just came from companies. So Jordan Noon, my co-founder, was at SpaceX. A lot of our early team was, SpaceX and people that came from other startups that were much larger. And so I think we had been part of the chaos of a bigger company. And so we said, okay, great, we're going to start this one, but we're going to run it way better. We're going to be a lot more efficient. And that was the wrong thing. We should have been focusing on growth early on and been okay if things weren't perfect. And so I think that caused some of the initial slowness. But then at the time, we were 14, so there was a moment where we raised a $35 million Series B from Playground Global, and I remember standing up in front of the whole company on that day that we announced it. So I don't think anyone really even knew we were fundraising, and I just remember telling them, hey, like, we raised this new funding round, like this is the next phase of the company. And we had been going through some pretty like intense cultural turmoil. There was just, I think, different visions internally of the direction we were going and what was important. And we had hired, I think, a really great core set of people, but certainly hadn't hired any like executives that had really built and scaled the company before in a big way. So we were all kind of just learning. And I remember, when I told the company we just got all this funding, just the look on everyone's faces. I was expecting celebrations and cheers, and that this news was all of a sudden going to bring everyone together and solve all of our problems. It was almost the exact opposite. Like, I just remember no one clapped. It was like it kind of disbanded. Of course, I'm sitting here with imposter syndrome, being like, am I a bad leader? Did I do a bad job? Like, just all the voices came in my head, and you kind of just, that was a breaking point, actually. Like, I still remember to this day, that was probably the lowest point of relativity to date, because it felt like even with all the resources in the world, there just wasn't enough internal spark in the team to like rally and be able to do it. So I kind of resorted to what at least had always worked for me personally in the past, which is whenever I've hit a personal breaking point, there's this like the true breaking point where you actually feel like you can't go on any longer. You always have to look yourself in the mirror and say, all right, like, I'm about to break. And so now what? And I think for me, I've usually just rallied and done something super crazy to like, maybe it's like a final hurrah or going all in or something. But in this moment, I said, to myself, all right, like, I got to do something crazy. It's not about the act of working harder, but it is about the message it sends that things are going to be different. And so I actually slept in a tent in the office. I originally was planning to do it for like a week or two. I think it ended up being 3 or 4 weeks, much to my partner Rochelle's chagrin, because she hadn't seen me, because I was on the funding road for like 5 months before that, and actually had moved to Silicon Valley, I think, to just do a bunch of pitches back to back to back. And so, yeah, it was more time in the office. In hindsight, I don't know if that actually did anything for anyone else, but it definitely did something for me. And it proved to myself that I was going to be all in and do what it took. And I was just hoping that energy would be contagious. And then the second thing was realizing, all right, we got to shoot for the absolute, like, top of the industry talent wise, essentially. Like, now that we have this funding, again, I think we have a great team. A lot of those people are still at Relativity, and doing great things, but we needed people that, have led 500-person teams or 1,000-person teams, and we're super kind of well known in the industry, not just because their resume is awesome, but because they're just like a killer engineering leader. And so started to go after some of those people and then hire them. And I think that then fed a flywheel where then I learned a lot faster how to be a great leader, because I hired people that they themselves were great leaders. And in many ways, I'm in a privileged position because I can just go hire those people. For them, many of them, came from companies like SpaceX that has probably employed, I don't know, 20,000, maybe 30,000 people through its whole history, like, through cycles. And some of these people led multi-thousand-person teams, and they were there for, 14, 15 years. So they actually had to do the hard work of climbing through, the entire ranks and rising to the top as the best leaders. And then I get to just, hire them and then learn from them and work with them.
Yes, it's a privilege and a responsibility. I'm sure you feel that sometimes too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, for better or worse, I do feel deeply responsible to our team and investors, but yeah, I'm super lucky. I have imposter syndrome all the time. The one thing I've never had imposter syndrome about is the like $700 million or 400 people. Like those are just numbers to me. Like I guess that part has never freaked me out as much as yeah, just getting a hold of what's going on, and the prioritization of what's next, and what do we need to work on, and where do I need to level up, and yeah, just being increasingly self-aware about what's important and what's not.
You've mentioned your zone of genius a couple of times on this interview. What have you learned about what your zone of genius is and isn't? And how has
Yeah.
that understanding of you evolved over time?
Yeah, it's definitely still evolving, so I wouldn't speak about it in concrete terms now, but and it took a while too. I think in hindsight, so I've definitely found I'm pretty good at sales, and like just as a skill set. So it's not just customer sales; it's investors, bringing them on board, hiring great people, ultimately customers, and I think yeah, a big part of that just I don't know where it came from. I mean, I guess it's just I believe it myself, and I'm willing to share it in a way that actually still mind blows me. So it's less convincing someone; it's more just sharing why am I convinced, and then being really open about it. So I think that's definitely a zone of genius that I've come to find. But then, yeah, I also think, strategically, we've made some really smart decisions, like really smart. And I would say there weren't actually really any giant mistakes strategically. Everything from, getting our launch sites and like how we approached product market fit early on, how we iterated that, the next product we're building, a lot of that was actually pretty right. And so I do think strategy, and having the foresight of how things are going to play out and really kind of coming to a good solution there, was a big one. I think areas that I'm focusing on, though, I think operationally, when it comes to metricizing or kind of operating by metrics and insights and data, and goal setting and really clear accountability and really clear, like, rallying the team and kind of having your finger on the pulse of exactly how everyone's doing, and not leading or coaching through what you think is best, but really paying attention to what actually works with each person. I think I'm still building the mental map of that. I think light years the last 2 or 3 years, light years ahead of where I was when I started. But yeah, I think I'm kind of finding that the EQ game, and really like the management skills and kind of coaching and leadership skills of a team, that is a deep game that has a lot of levels and a lot of learning, and just takes quite a bit more time. I haven't seen people that are necessarily natural out of the gate on it. I think everyone feels like a fish out of water to some extent.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely what seems to be the norm.
Yeah.
So the decision to leave YC, 25 years old, you and a co-founder, and to go and invest in an experienced executive coach is probably not a decision that every single person in your class at YC made.
No,
Why did you
I don't think
choose
so.
to do that, make that investment at that stage?
Yeah. So I think there were two real things actually. So the first is there was a lady, Amy, I believe her name was, at YC. She was a partner. I think she's left since, but she was their like internal founder psychologist or coach, like that actually worked at YC. And so they did give the advice to everyone that this was a great investment and that you should do it. Of course, not everyone took the advice. I think, yeah, like for whatever reason. But I've always actually taken almost every advisor, just asked tons of questions and then like really humble and pretended like you knew nothing. Like I think actually being young and never having been in the startup world and somewhat naive was actually a really big strength, because I just asked a ton of questions and I networked to find the best people to get advice from. And, I think investing and coaching over the last couple of years has really, built kind of a self-awareness skill set. So yeah, the second piece of it was, I had a co-founder, me and Jordan, I think even at the point we started the company, knew each other for 7 or 8 years. I mean, we knew each other through a lot of college. He was a few years younger than I was, but we had worked together in the same rocket lab. I went off to Blue Origin, he went off to SpaceX. And then, kind of after we left those companies on our drives home, we quickly formulated what became Relativity. But yeah, I think we're really different people, and we've learned we are very different people. And so there was a lot, it's like a marriage really. And it was kind of like we got married as very different people and then had to figure out how to work together. And so investing in coaching really helped us be more self-aware about our relationship, and ultimately figure out ways to scale together and actually invest in not just ourselves individually, but how we were actually showing up as a team, that I think ultimately helped us, certainly work together significantly longer. And yeah, Jordan has since, went on to, he started a venture capital firm, and I've heard, some rumblings that he's working to get into some other stuff of what comes next. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we, because of that experience, are really able to actually learn a ton together.
Are there specific things you remember learning, like breakthrough, aha moment, big insight along the way?
Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, I think especially from coaching, it was really great because I think it put a bunch of frameworks together that were not prescriptive, but actually help ascribe meaning to your own thought process. So, things like imposter syndrome, which I've mentioned a lot, which is really actually things are going very well, but you have this habit yourself of, like not really being used to that state where people are looking up to you and think you're great and amazing and doing a good job. And so it's just like putting a name to that. I think upper limiting is another one I've been thinking a lot about recently, where like things actually get so overwhelmingly good that ironically you actually do things to self-sabotage that state and make yourself feel sad or like hollow, essentially. And I thought that was really interesting because even before Relativity, I remember that totally happened to me. Like we'd go launch a rocket at USC, and like pretty much that day was actually a bad day usually for me. Like I would usually not feel great on the day that something amazing was accomplished. And that's been for many, many years. And then now the concept of upper limiting, it makes a ton of sense. It makes a ton of sense. And so I think just more awareness. It's not about controlling your psychology, but I think more awareness and more learning just helps you name what's going on. And I think that just puts a lot more mental framework to the experience of being a founder. And so, same with co-founder dynamics. Like I think, but before we started working with you, I mean, we were only a few months old as a company, but then, certainly as we started to scale and work together through the years, I just think it helped put a framework together when, we were like really disagreeing about something or, agreeing about something. I was like, well, why? Like, why is this part actually working and going very well? Like, why is this part not working? And, where are we both coming from? And it just, certain things became obvious as we learned more about ourselves, to then realize that, oh yeah, this makes sense in this dynamic, because my view of the world is like, like I don't know, kind of like play to win, or like we're going to take big bold bets and we're swinging for the fences, and you think more like, let's be really efficient and, be sure that everything is really well communicated and like details really matter. And so then it just was more clear where we could also play towards our zones of geniuses and strengths and weaknesses. And then, just made more sense, like why things were the way they were.
Mm-hmm. The two of you just had such clear, like, complementary personalities in so many ways. There were these opposites, and they seemed to fit together in these really nice ways.
Yeah. And on that, I mean, I think that's why I still remember the feeling, yeah, especially as we were defining what relativity was, like it was super yin and yang. I mean, essentially, when we both agreed, we knew we were coming to a very good source of truth. Like the odds of something being right, or the right strategy or story or direction, when we both agreed, was pretty powerful, because yeah, we would just come at it from such different places that then, I think it helped make sure what strategy we were doing, or, what technology development or who we were hiring worked for me and worked for Jordan. And that was a kind of perfect Venn diagram of what, ultimately made relativity a success so far.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How do you, with now close to 400 employees that you are accountable to, and 700 million raised, and rocket ship growth,
Yep.
and being in the press a lot, and all of this, how are you keeping yourself sustainable or sane?
Yeah, I think a big one for me is some unstructured time, actually, and just recognizing that I need that to recharge. So yeah, what I mean by unstructured time is some block, like whether it's 2 hours or 3 hours, that I know I'm not going to look at my phone or kind of be super reactionary to like emails and texts, but yeah, actually just kind of do nothing. And, I listen to music a lot. I think, certain things are more restorative than others, but man, that is 100% where I get a lot of creative ideas done, and it's really recharging. But it also is where I think a lot of the, strategic, like, breakthroughs happen, where, it's like everyone says go right and you're going left. And a lot of that kind of spontaneity, it doesn't even come from, trying to like figure it out. I think just not having structured time lets your brain, it's almost more in a meditative type state. Yeah, I've also done, I thought it was super weird at first, but yeah, like a float tank, type like sensory, yeah, you float on salt water. And yeah, it sounds so bizarre.
In a dark
It's
enclosed, it's
pitch
like
black.
almost like a
Yeah.
huge coffin, and
Yeah.
pitch black, and you're wearing a wetsuit, so you kind of like, you're buoyant, you float, and
Yeah.
it's
Or
quiet.
no wetsuit.
Or no wetsuit.
Yeah. But
Because
yeah.
it's so much saline in the water, right?
Yeah, you just float. Yeah. So yeah, it's super interesting. But no, I found, there too, you just, it's about kind of doing what recharges you. And I think that's really important. And the more and more momentum we get, the more I'm also like less fearful. Are we going to die this year? Are we going to die this year? It's not that there's not a lot of execution to go, but it does feel more tractable. And so then I'm realizing, okay, this is actually a marathon. Like now I'm 30, almost 31. So I could see, yeah, it's like pretty clear relativity is going to be around on this trajectory for the next decade. And I'm increasingly confident of that. And so if that's true, then I can now kind of see how, all right, I need to actually figure out how to make it sustainable for that period of time. And then same with the team too. I mean, I think that's important. And yeah, it's a big differentiator for our culture, as well, is that, yeah, at least paying attention to these signals. Doesn't mean we're not going crazy hard, because we definitely are, in certain places, but we're paying more attention to it. And I've been vulnerable with our team and normalized more that we can actually have these conversations and talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember closer to when we first started working together, and this will be the last topic I think we'll cover here. One of the biggest, I think, releases for you and your executive team, and also one of the things that allowed you guys to not leak as much energy, was when it really sunk in, this difference between fact versus story.
Yeah, I mean, I think fact and story is a really, really good framework that again, it's one of those things from coaching that in hindsight, it's so simple, but no one ever thinks about it that way. And then once you do, it's kind of like you can't turn back, and then you start to see it everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so fact and story were essentially, any feedback, and it's great for feedback, or it's great for situations where, people have different of opinions, and someone's like, oh, well, I see it this way. And you're like, well, I see it this way. You just kind of break it down and, say, okay, well, factually, here's what happened. And then, the other person can say, factually, here's what happened for them. And emotions are facts. I thought that was also pretty interesting, but it makes a lot of sense. It's like sensory wise, like what was said and what's happening. And then from there, you are figuring out what stories you're telling. So from the same set of facts, like the facts everyone should agree on, and then the stories are things that many people would have completely different interpretations of the same facts. But I think it's just recognizing that's what it is. Like, we've got the same series of facts, but we have different stories about them, and things that you're saying are making me make a story up in my mind, which may or may not be true, but I like feel it's very true because I'm telling it to myself, and that's heightening kind of emotions. I think separating that lets you be a much more objective and consistent leader. And I do think consistency is also very important, especially at scale, because the ship is quite hard to turn, both as quickly as it grows and then as large as it does. And so consistency is pretty important to try to get to, because it's more about compounding the kind of direction that you set. And each direction change just takes more time from the team to move forward.
I'd love if you could just touch briefly upon, why is this mission and vision that you're on, why does it matter? Like, why does space matter to you?
Yeah. So it matters a lot, but I'm not a space geek or rocket nerd like at all. I mean, well, okay, maybe I am a little bit at this point, but I didn't start out that way. I actually originally went to USC thinking I was going to graduate and be a screenwriter. So I actually had nearly perfect grades in science and math in high school, but actually dropped out of those classes to join the school newspaper. And then I, had a draft of a novel like in high school that, I was just like, had this dream of being a writer. And USC was a great film school. So, I've always felt more creative at heart. And I just think of engineering more like creativity with physics. And then, of course, being an entrepreneur, it's even better because you have to be a storyteller and, really learn how to kind of congeal a vision, which is super fun to me. So I think from that standpoint, I think going to Mars and making humanity multiplanetary is really just important for the vision of what the human species is all about. I think there's tons of problems to solve on Earth, and there's no question about that. But to me, it just gets much more philosophical and existential. Like, if we were having this conversation and there were actually 1 million people living on another planet, like right now, having their own conversations and, like maybe long distance relationships and love stories between Earth and Mars. And, really it's about expanding the possibilities for human experience. And I just think the emotions, the complexity of what it means to be a human being would be greatly expanded. And then that's worthwhile because, what else is the point of being human other than just expanding experience and maximizing our potential as a species. So, I think that's why it's worthwhile. is because really I think it is about what is the ultimate purpose of our species.
Is it a purpose of our species? Like, does it matter necessarily that we get there?
I think I'm less, I mean, I certainly want it to happen in reality because I think it's a lot more inspiring for it to be real than for it to just be an idea. And I think, film and many art forms already kind of carry you somewhere else in fantasy land. And so I do think actually making it happen is a lot more interesting. But no, I think like it's kind of what it means to be human to me. Like, I think one of the most unique traits about human beings is that we are willing to go after things that are seemingly impossible and come out the other side somehow against all odds successful. And I think it's just about the pursuit of something so ambitious and so seemingly impossible, and then proving to the world and to ourselves that, yeah, like despite that, like we figured it out. And I think that's just really interesting because, I think it just is more what it means to be human, and then spend your life doing that. Because I have since high school thought about what I want to do from the standpoint of, all right, I'm already 90 years old, looking backwards, what do I wish I spent my time on? And everyone dies eventually anyway, and like I'm not like fatalistic about it, but I think it's actually extremely empowering because you can't actually fail. Like, you can pretty much do whatever you want and literally cannot fail. If you take that perspective of life that, it's going to end eventually anyway. So this is kind of just playtime to do amazing things. And I think, yeah, at least for me, I get a ton of energy from that place because, it's like, I think, inarguable.
Well, Tim, that's all we've got time for today. There's tons of questions I didn't ask you, but we have such a good collection of things. Did you get to cover?
Yeah.
You wanted to cover?
Yeah. I thought it was fantastic, and no, I'd be happy to share more in the future. I think, I haven't done a ton of this to date, but I think, as I've picked up on actually learning some stuff through the years now, it feels like it's always great to share.
So thank you so much for taking the time to learn something hopefully new and interesting and inspiring today. I really hope this brought you some clarity. Please do share and recommend this show to others. That is very helpful for getting the world kind of on the same page with you. And now you've got a team of champions that you can be in dialogue with about this stuff. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week.